My name is Barbara Baran. I'm with the California Budget Project, and we'll be moderating this panel, and it's my great pleasure to do so. The topic of the panel, as y'all hopefully know, or as the airline pilots always say, make sure you're on the right plane, is what are the opportunities in California to strengthen and or create venues for linking economic and workforce development planning in energy efficiency and related sectors. And clearly, this question in its broadest form has the question of how to better link workforce and economic development, including all our education and training programs, really has vexed state, local, and federal policymakers for a long time. But I think over the last 2 decades, as you heard in some of the plenary sessions today, at least referred to, there's been some really exciting and innovative work going on around the country that has begun to settle on a set of sort of clearly emerging best practices or promising practices for what begins to work well to meet the needs of workers for good jobs with good wages and career opportunities, and at the same time meet the competitive needs of industry. And so really the question, at least in my mind today, is how do we take those same practices and begin to apply them to these emerging new energy efficiency and other related sectors. So we have with us 4 really amazing speakers to help us think about that topic. I want to give them the excuse of saying to you all that this is their second time around, and the first time around they were fabulous. As Eleni just said, it may be a little harder to be spontaneous the second time round, but I'll bet they can do it. Anyway, first with us on my left is Eleni Papadakis. And she's from Washington State, is the executive director of Washington State's Workforce Training and Education Coordinating Board. And Washington has this really interesting tripartite board made up of business, labor, and government that has a really wide reach, much wider reach than many other state boards, covering something like 18 different funding streams. And I think even more critical for our purpose, Washington State has been a real leader in beginning to do the kind of sector work that Carol was describing in the plenary this morning. As a matter of fact, I work with a reform effort here in California called the California Edge Campaign, and we actually brought a bunch of state legislators and legislative staff up to see the good work they're doing there, and people were both astonished and delighted. So Eleni will be talking to us about how they have both initiated that work and over numbers of years now been able to sustain it. And then what we're going to do is come home to California, starting at the state level. We're going to, Barbara Halsey and Panama Bartholomy are going to talk to us about what's happening at the state level. Barbara's the executive director of the California Workforce Investment Board, and therefore a colleague of Eleni's at the national level. And under Barbara's leadership, the board has moved increasingly seriously to adopt sector strategies as a central component of their efforts to address our state's workforce needs. And Panama, I have to read this, is a very long title. Panama is the Deputy Director for Efficiency and Renewals Division of the California Energy Commission, and there he's led efforts to implement the Recovery Act, Clean Energy Workforce Development, land use, renewable energy, and green building efforts. And finally, we'll go to the local level, and we'll hear from Larry Frank, who is Deputy Mayor of Neighborhood and Community Services in our largest cities. Los Angeles is under Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, and he's going to talk to us a lot about sort of a staged process that they've gone through about pulling together a whole set of stakeholders at the citywide, at the city level, and then beginning to take that and drill down into both sector approaches and I think what we heard called this morning high road approaches. So to say that we have only, less than an hour and a half now, an hour and 15 minutes to do all of that, and we really want to be able to hear your voices in this. In our previous session, we started out sort of taking some questions and getting them on the board. I don't have anything to write on, but why don't we anyway just hear a very few number, please, of sort of issues you would like to hear this panel address before they start so they can sort of be thinking about it. But then we're going to carefully reserve the time to have a real discussion later. They did a great job the first time around talking to time limits. So thoughts, things you'd like to hear them address, please.
I'm Chuck Flax with the San Diego Workforce Partnership. And my question is about engagement of business. We are doing a lot of different sector initiatives in the region. And we've discovered through surveys and anecdotal reports that businesses are not aware of the lots and lots of different subsidies coming down from the federal government and the state. And in general, there's a suspicion and hostility towards that sort of engagement.
Mm-hmm. Great. We actually had the same question in our first session. This is clearly a problem. Yes. Great. Well, Barbara can bring that up in her remarks. Other questions? We'll be thinking about them, and I'm sure that our panel will stimulate them. One more.
I'm Jean Clinton with the PUC. From a public policy perspective, I'd like to, as I'm listening to this session, be thinking about what kinds of input data or information do we need to make decisions, whether we're in the energy world or the workforce world. And I'm thinking that some of those are information about cost to do X or Y, information about expected outcomes, maybe information about expected starting points or baselines, and so that we can begin to think, how many resources can we devote to X versus Y versus Z to achieve our sort of common objectives?
Great. Thank you. Clearly, the research being done was a step in that direction. So I want to start, as I said a minute ago, we're going to start sort of slightly big picture with Eleni and then begin to drill downward in California.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you all for attending and inviting me. I'm going to stand because I'm going to try to do this by PowerPoint. So I was asked to talk about the bigger picture and how we arrived at our strategy of bringing economic or business development closer together with workforce development and education. And Washington started this initiative about 10 years ago. After 10 years of increasing investment in workforce development and post-secondary education and credentialing, especially targeted to the middle skilled jobs, and After that time, as the Workforce Board continued to measure how we were doing meeting the skills needs of employers, we survey employers annually to find out if we're getting them what we need. We found out that we weren't making as much of a difference as we needed to. That while we were training and educating in the right fields, the skills that folks were gaining through that education and training wasn't right on target, and we needed to get closer. So the board came up with this concept of seeding dialogue, active, ongoing dialogue among business folks within a targeted sector, the education training providers, sometimes K-12, sometimes community-based organizations, and advocacy groups. You'll see on the title, it's the sector to cluster strategy, because while we started out focusing on very specific industry sectors, we realized that we had the same issues in the supplier vendor chains. The other thing about calling it a cluster rather than a sector is we consider education and training a supplier to the industry, and so we automatically get lumped in there when we use that definition. So skill panels were created in 2000, and these are partnerships at the regional level where businesses, often competitors, are sitting in the room together with educators and workforce development folks and others to talk about their real business needs today and then into the future. And we ask employers to give us real projections and use their business plans to help drive that. And if you can imagine, it gets to be a pretty tense conversation when you have competitors in the room. But I think someone this morning talked about, having that sort of shared pain. So they're at the point where they need these skills in order to be competitive. And you can see from the list, they do planning and root cause analysis, collective vision of success. So where are they aiming, and are they going to get there together? And then the last bullet is probably the most important: cooperative investment in solution. So the state and the feds are putting their money in different ways, and even the trainees are putting their money in. But how do employers co-invest in meaningful ways that make a difference to their business bottom line? I should say the collective vision of success, somebody asked about measures. We do ask for them to come up with metrics that the business recognizes that will tell them if they're actually getting the skills that they need. And some sample results, it's been everything to K-12 teachers incorporating examples from the industry into their curriculum, to new apprenticeship programs, on-the-job training strategies. And the one I think that's best connected to this discussion is the new skill standards for the energy industry. In fact, there's a workshop going on now with Barbara Hinz-Turner, who runs the Center for Clean Energy in the state, which brings me to the next point. So skill panels were seedlings. And there was limited state funding that went in across the state. And the skill panels were time limited, and we never intended to fund them for a very long time. But it was very clear that as these discussions, as these dialogues continued, and we expected them to continue for a long time, that the drilling down into the curriculum and delivery of instruction was also going to have to continue. We also realized that what was happening in one part of the state had impact in other parts of the state, either because there were aspects of the same industry or cluster, or because there were vendors in other parts of the state, or people being educated to work in that industry in other parts of the state. So the Center for Excellence concept is a little different than California's. Our centers are at the community college, but they're very industry focused on a specific industry, and they serve as the center of excellence for that industry for the entire state. Mostly for the community college system, but depending on the targeted sector, it could be K-12 and four-year institutions as well. And they look at the whole pipeline, and they work directly with industry, not just on curriculum, but also in pedagogy and methodology and instructional delivery. So the Pacific Northwest Center of Excellence for Clean Energy is at Centralia Community College. It started out as a skilled panel and now is not only the Center of Excellence, excuse me, for the state of Washington, but they are now working with a consortium of 5 states delivering these same services. So the learning, the expansive learning that happens when they work across other regions is enormous for the state. And this, is it showing up here? No. So skill panels and centers of excellence have really gone to scale. We hardly fund them. There are about 52 that are operating across the state. You can't see that, but you get the sense because it's the whole state up there. And if you could see it, you'd see lots of little dots and things all over the place. But we fund, at this point, only about a dozen of them. Chambers of commerce have taken up the model, trade and industry associations, unions, it's across the board. It's been taken up and utilized because it is proven to be successful. So the next stage of this model is the changes in state infrastructure. We realized, we can't be expecting them to do it at the local level if we're not also doing it at the state level. We now have joint strategic planning at the state level between the economic development folks and the workforce development folks. We sit on each other's state boards. There were a couple of bills passed that now require coordination at the local level between local workforce investment boards and economic development councils, and the establishment of common metrics between the economic development world and the workforce development world. So I think we're really working hard to drive all boats in the same direction. And then one final piece of the strategy that emerged over time is we started to realize that the cost of developing and implementing industry-specific training was more expensive than what the colleges were paying for the traditional courses. And so the legislature took our recommendations and developed a new fund pool called high demand funds, which it's actually the same fund pool, but a college can get a higher FTE rate if they can demonstrate that this is a high employer demand area. So that's also been beneficial. Okay. Thank you.
So I don't have a PowerPoint, and I hope all of you can see me. I'm just going to sit with my cookie as I talk to you. I was thinking, when you do this the second time, the second group is probably the beneficiary of you being able to sit back after that first presentation and remember all the things you wanted to say but didn't. So if you're in the first group and you're here for the second round, you may hear some new information. Who knows? So I'm Barbara Halsey, and I'm with the California Workforce Investment Board. And I want to talk just a little bit about the reason why the state board said sector strategies and specifically industry clusters as our unit of consideration became why we decided that was our priority for understanding California's economy and the appropriate workforce development response to that economy. So in 2007, the legislature passed the Workforce Training Act in California, SB 293. And SB 293 called for the state board to develop a comprehensive workforce plan for the state. And when I came into this position in May of 2007, there was some discussion about whether or not that plan was actually a compliance document that we filed with the Department of Labor on an annual basis that articulated what we were going to do with our workforce investment dollars and our Wagner-Pizer program. We made a strategic decision and decided that we wanted to go a bit farther than that compliance document. And we really wanted to create a transformational shift within California's workforce system. I had the great opportunity to meet Eleni at the National Governors Association. And through my exposure to a number of the workforce investment boards across the nation, really saw incredible value in organizing around sector strategies and the foundational principles of sector strategies as the plan that could potentially move California forward from a workforce perspective. In 2008, the State Workforce Investment Board did adopt sector strategies as its foundation for planning. We shifted the language in the legislation of SB 293 from what we perceived was a responsibility for static planning to dynamic process. We really wanted what the State Board was engaging in to be much more active, to be dynamic, so that we didn't get into that comfort zone. We didn't do a plan and set it on a shelf and feel like we had answered the questions we needed to answer, because we were seeing such huge shifts in California's economy. So with sector strategies, we really believed it provided us with access to a methodology that was dynamic. We looked at the work that had been done by the Economic Strategy Panel. We've been a long-term partner with the panel in the California Regional Economies Project. We had been providing training on a regional basis on the industry clusters of methodology. It's a dynamic, data-driven piece that pairs really rich economic trend information with good labor market information together so that you can use that across partnerships for decision making. And we knew that there was something there that we wanted to promote throughout the state. At the same time that we were having conversations about how we were going to implement data-driven, sector-based planning, AB 3018 came into our view. And initially, AB 3018, the Green Collar Jobs Act in California, called for the creation of a separate council that sat outside of any existing entity within state government, and had a very similar membership to what we had on the California Workforce Investment Board. Our education partners, some of our business partners, business transportation and housing, employment training panel. It had some additional members that we didn't have on the board, the Energy Commission, the Public Utilities Commission, but we knew that we could potentially augment our membership through a special committee and create the kind of vehicle that the legislature was looking for. So we were able to provide some technical assistance to then Speaker Bass and her staff. And when AB 3018 passed, it called for the California Workforce Investment Board to create a subcommittee, the Green Collar Jobs Council, as a special committee to look at what workforce needed to be doing in order to respond to the needs of the green economy and to create the kinds of training pathways that led people into employment within the green sector. We convened the first meeting of the Green Collar Jobs Council in February of 2009, and it was at that point that we started developing stronger relationships with the Energy Commission, Public Utilities Commission, Environmental Protection Agency, the Air Resources Board, and started to understand what the policy loading order was of California's climate policies. So it was a great education for us, and it also led us down a path in terms of where we should be looking at first investments for clean energy workforce training. Panama will talk a bit about the formation of the Clean Energy Workforce Training Project, so I'm not going to cover that right now. What I want to get to is we also understood that there was an opportunity to help our regions better understand what was going on within their economies that was related to clean technology and the green economy. We had the good work that had been done by Next 10, defining the 15 segments of California's green economy. We had the industry clusters of opportunity methodology, and we had strong interest from the board in looking at how we could spur the right kind, or what we felt was the right kind of regional planning partnerships to move those boards forward and to develop the right kinds of partnerships around green collar jobs. So we pulled together $2 million of the Workforce Investment Board's funding, and the Energy Commission was kind enough to align $500,000 of their funding to support some particular kinds of investigation around alternative vehicles and alternative fuels. And we were able to fund 10 regional partnerships specifically for the purpose of planning. We provided to those 10 partnerships a deep diagnostic of what was going on within their green economies. So it took a look at their traditional economy, and of that traditional economy, what slice of those key industries were green or greening. But most importantly, it took a future look. It looked at the 15 segments of the green economy that have recently been identified through the Next 10 work. And it showed them where they had industries that were rapidly growing and allowed them to begin to develop the kinds of partnerships they needed to better understand what business needs were within those economies or within those industries. So what we have now is 10 regional partnerships, each receiving $200,000 apiece. Of those 10 regional partnerships, 7 are focusing very intently on the green economy. In those 7 partnerships, or actually in all 10 partnerships, we've seen the development of 23 sector strategies that are now maturing. Partners are being brought together. We required that education, economic development, business, most importantly, and community-based partners be a part of the planning to look at the data, understand what that data means, allowing them to then begin aligning systematically what was going on at the local level, what resources that they had at the local level, what was higher education, community colleges, K-12, what were they doing to support the industry, what did economic development need to do to support the industry? So we really are trying to resource their thinking about how they need to construct the kinds of cross-system partnerships that will address the needs of growing industries within that regional economy. We've had our initial action clinics with those grantees, introduced them to the diagnostic piece that they received. We've been working with Collaborative Economics as our primary consultant on the project, and we've done employer engagement convenings with those grantees, bringing employers in for feedback, connecting those local workforce investment boards and their regional partners to the employers in the communities. In December, we had those grantees come back up and initially lay out what their investment strategies were. So now we're starting to see what industries are they focusing on, where do they need assistance with building partnerships, where are they beginning to align education systems and economic development opportunities around these businesses, and more is yet to come. So I will stop there. Thank you. You don't have to get out your 2-minute warning.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Afternoon, everybody. Great to see so many friendly, familiar faces, and lucky me, I have 2 of my bosses in the audience as well. So I'm editing my remarks. I was asked to come and talk about the implementation of the Recovery Act from a perspective of combining economic development and workforce development initiatives together. And what the Recovery Act represented for California was a significant new opportunity to bring new players into the fields of workforce development and economic development in the clean energy sector. In the past, basically, when you look at it from an energy efficiency perspective, it's really the Public Utilities Commission and the investor-owned utilities who have been the major player for years now on trying to push an energy efficiency market and sector here in California. And with the investment of hundreds of millions of dollars into California coming to both the Energy Commission and to local governments, you all of a sudden had, in just 1 year, the transformation of program administrators that you never saw before and had never had the experience of working for a long time and building up this industry. And in addition to just new players, you had new goals of complete market transformation, about moving the energy efficiency sector from a cottage industry into a major new sector of the economy where a significant amount of jobs can come out of. And so what we looked at in 2009 as we were preparing plans for how to spend the money is we saw an opportunity for a lot of jobs, but also the opportunities for a lot of confusion and a lot of delay. And so when we looked at how are we going to create these jobs and the programs that will use these people effectively, we saw really 2 significant needs: workforce development and economic development opportunities. On the workforce development side, the Energy Commission historically has had very little experience in the workforce development area. And so we looked at our opportunities to provide training in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and clean transportation. We looked out to some of our other partners that are already really advanced in working in this area, and working with Steve and Paul and Barbara and the other folks in the Labor and Workforce Development Agency about using their existing infrastructures, using their existing connections. We put together the Clean Energy Workforce Training Program. As Chairman Douglas talked about earlier today, the largest state-sponsored green workforce training program in the country, relying upon the infrastructures that had already been set up through workforce investment boards, community colleges, and local partnerships across California. we worked to create over 50 partnerships of community colleges, WIBs, and local governments to put together comprehensive training programs that were going to deliver well-trained workers just in time for when our economic development programs rolled out and all of our retrofit programs happened as well. On the tail of that, we were looking at the investment of about $500 million in the first year when you combine all the utility programs, the local government programs, and the Energy Commission programs of energy efficiency retrofit money across California. And looking at the opportunity for mass market confusion, the Public Utilities Commission, the Energy Commission, local governments and utilities came together and said, we need to really be going out to the consumer market and speaking with one strong, consistent voice to be able to reduce consumer confusion and be able to facilitate energy efficiency retrofits as quickly and effectively as possible with as little as administration as possible. And so we jointly created Energy Upgrade California that, again, Chairman Douglas talked about earlier, that opportunity to be able to directly engage with consumers in an effective way. Never before have we brought so many silos together in so short a time to try to accomplish so much. One of my colleagues came up to me after hearing me talk about silos and said, you know, it's a really derogatory term. It's not really silos. They're more like cylinders of excellence that we all work within. And cylinders, silos, take it what you will. One of the many things we learned out of this process and this amazing new partnerships that were developed is that many hands make more work. And what we have coming up is the rollout of these programs in January after a significant amount of work that's been done to be able to develop this. But as I'll come around to the end of my talk about the opportunities that have been created through these partnerships. That was the good part of the Recovery Act so far. The bad part of the Recovery Act has been a significant amount of delay that I don't think any of us expected, and of course none of us planned for or wanted in the rollout of the economic development parts of these programs. Whether it was the loss of the property assessed clean energy program and the planning that local governments, the Energy Commission and others had for 75% of the state's population to be in a PACE district by the third quarter of this year. When that got pulled away, it brought about the need for a significant restructuring of our plans and the use of energy efficiency conservation block grant and state energy program money. Whether it's the delay of the constant changes in Recovery Act guidelines or the legal and other lawsuits that we're facing around the program, what we had is a significant delay in the rollout of our economic development programs that is now leaving hanging many of the folks that have gone through our training programs. And Barbara taught me a new term today. It's a just-in-time training. And one of our real lessons that we need to learn out of this is how do we account for some of the unexpected opportunities that we have in our economic development programs when we're working to tie together our workforce development and economic development programs. There's been a lot of talk about the disappointments of the green jobs movement and the lack of green jobs. And let me just tell you, here in California, 2010 was about creating the programs. 2011 is when we're going to be seeing the rollout of these programs and the impact of these programs. In early January, Energy Upgrade California will roll out, and just right now we're starting to see some of the beginning of construction of some of these significantly large-scale renewable energy projects across California's deserts. I want to briefly touch on the good, the bad, and now the ugly parts of the Recovery Act. One of the very ugly things that has been exposed by the Recovery Act is the lack of coordination between our economic development, workforce development, and clean energy plans at the state level in California. Barbara has done a masterful job with the Workforce Investment Board and the Green Collar Jobs Council of looking from a workforce development perspective about what are the opportunities to be able to capture some of the clean energy policies and have the impact on the workforce community. I would assert that we have not done as good of a job in developing a clean energy strategic plan for California that fully looks at the full opportunities of the workforce development communities and incorporated that in. And I think some of the partnerships that we've developed in the Recovery Act implementation is going to be able to lead us towards the incorporation of those two policies together. Additionally, what we've seen is that our clean energy strategies have become economic development strategies for other states and other countries. In 2007, when the California Solar Initiative passed the legislature, only 2% of solar panels funded under that program were manufactured in China. This year, 47% of the panels funded under the California Solar Initiative will be manufactured in China. Next year, likely over half of them. More and more, our clean energy policies are becoming economic development strategies for other places, and we need to take a very hard look at the implementation over the next few years of our programs about how do we capture more of that economic development potential here in California, and what is the balance for how much of that weighs on the back of ratepayers and taxpayers in California, and be able to really try to strike that within a legislative and an implementation perspective. I'll end with the opportunities that I see out of our lessons learned from the Recovery Act, about 3 programs that the Energy Commission's involved in, and I hope that you'll be involved in. Assembly Bill 758, authored but locally by Assemblymember Nancy Skinner, groundbreaking bill that for the first time in the history of this nation gives the state agency authority to implement programs to reduce energy consumption in existing buildings. A wide suite of programs, workforce development, marketing and outreach, financing, mandatory upgrades, a wide-ranging program that the Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission will be working on together to implement. And I'm hoping that the partnerships that have been formed under Energy Upgrade California and the Recovery Act implementation are going to give us not only some of our pilot programs about some of our exploration into these areas, but really make sure that we're looking at the tens of billions of dollars of ratepayer investments that are going to be made with the Public Utilities Commission and the investor-owned utilities over the next couple decades, with the new mandates and abilities from a regulatory perspective of the Energy Commission. How do we have them play off of each other so that we're pushing the envelope with ratepayer funds and then coming in and spreading it across the state with a regulatory backdrop following on that? And I'm hoping that the partnerships at the state as well as the local level we've created under Energy Upgrade California can lead us towards an effective implementation of that. The second program I want to mention is AB 118. It's about $120 million a year of clean transportation, infrastructure investment, and other opportunities to really start to build up a clean transportation sector in California. We're rolling out the first few programs of that right now, but we haven't seen the same kind of collection of partnerships that have been developed between the workforce economic development communities across California coming to us and working on a full comprehensive strategy for the rollout of that. We have an implementation plan that has really been guided by a wonderful advisory committee, but some of the real partnerships that have come out of the Recovery Act I think would truly benefit to make sure that we truly capture the economic benefits of this program. So I'll end there, and I look forward to not only the conversation but working with you folks on in the future tying these programs together.
Afternoon. Carol Zabin, when we talked on the phone, asked us to come and talk a little bit about now taking some of this work and taking it down to the local level. So I'm providing you with some of the little documents that were useful to us to kind of build what we called our LA Workforce Systems Collaborative in LA. So you hear all about sector-based work. In 2005, our WIB actually adopted sectors. I won't identify how we did it or whatever it was, but one of them was utilities. We did, from that, we ended up taking several $1 million away from our WorkSource and OneSource centers and putting it into an innovation fund and getting them to compete to actually build training programs. And we now have 11 training programs. And with that base, we started a simple collaboration that allowed us to get deeper into the economic development side. So I'm going to highlight where some of the conversation happens between the workforce development folks and the economic development folks. But quite honestly, I think one of the things that is missing here is a deeper dive on the economic development front of the energy efficiency programs. And it probably, a lot of us are, we dabble in economic development, but we are not the experts. And there is a whole funding side of it, and there is a private investment side of it, and there's a number of pieces that would have been useful to have a deeper conversation, I think, on that front. But we do know the public utility side and the IOU, utility side, obviously, at this conference. So the pieces of work that then came together, the second document is a simple little resolution that was signed off by all the players that allowed us to actually commit to start working together, and we've been relentless for the last 3.5 years, meeting at least once a month to put together a programmatic piece of work, what we call our Workforce Systems Collaborative. Who we put in the room kind of predicts what the values are that sort of were adopted. So it was made up of the LA Community College District, the largest one in the country, LA Unified School District, the second largest in the country, the Chamber of Commerce, the LA Economic Development Corporation, which really is our research base, the County Federation of Labor, the city, the county, United Way, which actually brings their funders collaborative to the table, as well as some convening capacity, and the EDD, Employment Development Department. And that becomes sort of the working group. And the pieces of work that we focus on, well, first of all, there are two kind of basic commitments that we came in with based on who the partners were. First one was a focus on, as we built programs, that it was going to be a public training provider, because we had the community college district and the school district in the room, and we made a commitment to a public training partner. And the second one we made a commitment to is, wherever possible, being labor was in the room, that we would work on building high road partnerships. And it became a kind of profound piece of the work that we've been doing in Los Angeles, because we've been able to get a number of the training partnerships to bring dollars to the table that are outside of our public finance system. So, for example, in our hospitality training program, there's $1.5 million in Taft-Hartley training funds that they haven't known how to spend, as they put their penny per member per hour into a fund. And so, based on building this high road partnership in hospitality with between the industry and the union, they've actually gone to a nickel per member per hour in the last round of negotiations. We've been able to actually build a significant funding source to kind of make permanent, not ARA dependent, but not boutique, but permanent opportunities to build training programs. So the big pieces of work that we focused on as a systems collaborative, one is we did joint advocacy. So anytime there's someone that comes from DC, we actually meet as a group. We look like we have our act together in Los Angeles, and sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, right? Second, we do work on systems integration. So, for example, in building the training partnerships, we expect our work source providers paid for with WIA funds to do the recruitment, the case management, the support services, and the placement services, and we expect our training partners to do the training. And we actually have been able to fill those pieces out. The complexity comes in trying to bring in the labor management committees that really want to have a piece of the action, and that always is a tough negotiation, but a fruitful result if you can figure it out, right? The other parts of the systems integration work, as we actually require direct referrals between some of our different agencies in terms of our case management opportunities. We do articulation agreements between LAUSD and the Community College District. We've been making actual headway on how our systems actually, work together and function. A big piece of the work that I would actually recommend to you is that the next document, down 2 pages or 3 pages, is a work that we developed around developing a rubric in favor of a sector intermediary. So while we were able to have a good conversation at a 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 foot level amongst the players in the room, to actually have the deeper conversation about what the needs were, the demand-driven needs of the industry, where the labor fit in the equation, because there was just one representative. As you know, the WIB requirement went from 7% to 15% of all WIB boards are now organized labor, which gives us 7 in Los Angeles, and we have 7 big sectors, so it allows us to actually have a partnership in place, high road partnership built into our WIB board and that decision-making structure as well. But at the systems collaborative, we focus on sector intermediaries and the real role of the planning, the convening, the brokering, the measuring, and the assessment process that we expect of a sector intermediary. Not only do they have to convene the players, not only have to convene the players in an intelligent way, not always in the same room at the same time, but figuring out how to pull the pieces together. And we fund that, from our workforce investment board activities. So let me just jump to, we do a lot of joint applications. We figured out how to do that. ARA kind of forced us out of our cylinders of excellence. We do a lot of work around youth employment. That's something that all the players are very serious about. We do a lot of combined programs between the Community College District, LUSD, Chamber, so the last page on the last side is all the different programs we put together. We've gone from 3,000 summer youth opportunities to 15,000 in the last 2 years, and we're all about to fall off the cliff, everybody, right? So we're very focused right now because we've all been dependent upon ARA dollars for the last 2 years, right? So this year we're going to fall off a cliff because most of us have dismantled our existing programs and dependent on ARA dollars, so we are focused like never before, trying to figure out how to not fall off the cliff this next summer. And I suggest that in your regions you do the same. And then we focus a lot on joint promotion strategies. So in this effort, one of the sectors, and it's all based on sector strategy, so one of the sectors being utilities, we've done a fair amount of work. We invested in LA Trade Tech. You might have been in a panel with either Marcy Drummond or Leticia Barajas, where we invested heavily in doing the Trade Tech to be our sector intermediary on utilities and green jobs. We have the largest public utility in the nation, the Department of Water and Power. It's different issues than the IOs are dealing. We have our own issues, believe me. But we have been able to do some interesting work. It took us 4 years to actually create what's called a vocational worker position, a pre-civil service classification at the Department of Water and Power, carefully negotiated with our labor partners, that allows for us to do what's called utility pre-craft trainee for a person to be hired rather than to be tested for a civil service position and 3,000 people show up and none of them are from Los Angeles that are reachable. We're allowed to actually do a pre-civil service classification using our existing workforce programs and partners, our workforce centers, to do referrals from the city of Los Angeles to openings at the Department of Water and Power. And so we've been able to build that program, and we're using that program to build out the energy efficiency programs out in the Department of Water and Power. So I just end by saying there's a few tools that are available to workforce development professionals, and we all have to be extremely good at using these tools. So when it comes to construction, you need to be relentless in figuring out how to do project labor agreements, superseding contracts in order to get local hire out of your public works opportunities. We have, I think now we're at 49 project labor agreements, and we're going department-wide at Public Works, at the port, at the airport, not at DWP. But at MTA, we have $40 billion we just approved for construction in Measure R funds for building out our public transit in Los Angeles. And we're struggling through the process of figuring out local hire with construction in that arena. When it comes to personal service contracts, there are ways to do local hire on personal service contracts. The primary way is that you do it through what's called first source hiring programs. So for example, the fire department in the city of LA has contracts to do brush clearance, and you say, okay, any new hires that you get out of that contract from the city of Los Angeles, you have to allow us to refer people for the first 2 weeks. You cannot hire inside or outside until we have a chance to fill opportunities. They don't have to hire your people, but you actually bring them, a carefully assessed pipeline which people learn to trust. Right? We do the same thing at the airport. We have a very advanced first source hiring program at the airport where we have 30,000 people that are working and a lot of opportunities. So local hire, first source, what I explained for public sector hiring, what you can do with pre-civil service classifications and vocational worker programs is a key to actually getting significant local hire. So if you were to do a PLA for energy efficiency, which is the holy grail for some people in the labor movement, what you get is you end up getting maybe 1 or 2 new apprentices on the 100 employees, right? And in this environment where everybody's sitting on the bench, you're doing your best to keep people working that you worked hard to get into the trades over the last 2 years with your strategies, right? But in a energy efficiency environment where you have a employer like an IOU or a public service, a public utility, we are able to basically 80 out of 100 employees, you're able to actually hire from the community using a vocational worker strategy. So it gives you a real opportunity to do community-based hiring, to build public interest and support for your initiatives. And so then I'll refer you last to, and then there's other pieces, just so you know, there's local content, there's local preference strategies, there's a lot of things we can do to actually figure out how it is that the programs that we're building actually benefit the urban and communities that some of us represent, or whoever it is that you're representing. I would just end by saying, go to the last page and you'll see the scorecard that we used, how we've been moving 100,000 Los Angeles residents into living wage job opportunities over the last 5 years by category. And you'll see the first category, screen jobs, and the total number there is 130. And so that unfortunately does speak a little bit to the complexity of what we're all chasing in terms of the holy grail of the jobs side of this equation. Since June 30th, we've added 40 folks that were supposed to be community hires to do our energy upgrades or our retrofit program in the city on city buildings using energy efficiency conservation block grants. But because of our early retirement program, we can't hire from the outside, but we did manage to hire 40 laid-off GSD workers to do that work, right? And then 25 utility pre-craft trainees from the community at the Department of Water and Power. So we're at, I guess, what's that make us? That's 205, I think, in a city of 4 million. So it is a challenge to figure out all these pieces of work. We all have to be relentless. We also have to look for what the opportunities are. And there's other pieces besides the public side of this equation, but we can talk about in the Q&A. Thank you.
And I just want to assure you that Panama, having his boss in the room, did make a difference. His remarks the first time around were much racier. I actually, first time around, I was able to sort of congeal from the questions that we took a theme, but that didn't occur to me this time. So I think the better part of wisdom would be to let y'all drive this conversation. So why don't we start with whatever questions or comments you'd like to make in response to what you've heard so far. Anybody?
Well, perhaps I could just start with answering one of the questions that was asked.
Great. Well, that'd be fabulous.
Yeah, that was asked by Chuck from San Diego, talking about the engagement of business and programs. And one of the things that was really exposed to us as we started to roll out Recovery Act programs is we held 9 regional energy efficiency retrofit summits across California, where we had representatives of the local government, the utilities, Public Utilities Commission, us, the workforce community, and then the local contractor community coming and saying, here's all the programs that are coming, here's what's necessary for you to take part in these programs, and here's what you need to know about the home performance community so you can get ready and be eligible to take part in this. We had not only the hardest time getting the small business support community and the agencies involved with these, but when we did get them out there, we had a really hard time plugging them in. I mean, these are the folks who are tasked with providing support to the burgeoning entrepreneurs of this sector and other sectors across California, and it's, I think, indicative of our lack of connection between our clean energy work and our economic development work, that we haven't been able to bring the small business support infrastructure and the programs, the tax credits, the loan guarantees into the clean energy sector as well. Because what we're talking about is basically small jobs here and needing to build those businesses up. And so I think that Barbara and some of the work they're doing in the Labor Workforce Development Agency is trying to get at exactly that point, but it very much exposed the need and the lack of that connection.
So just to build on what Panama was saying, as a result of conversations that happened at the Green Collar Jobs Council meetings, we did identify that there was really no easy way for businesses in California to begin to understand what kinds of incentives were available at the state level through multiple departments that could help them either through incentives or loan guarantees or grant programs. So the staff at the State Workforce Investment Board began working with a staff work group that we have, representatives from each of the entities that sits on the Green Collar Jobs Council, to identify just from those state agencies, what are the incentive programs that are available? What do they look like? Are they tax credits? Are they loan programs? Are they grant programs? And we began compiling a resource document. And it led us to other information that is available, or other programs that are available from entities that aren't on the Green Collar Jobs Council but do have critical investment funds available. So we've started compiling volumes 1, volume 2, and probably volume 3. Not a very high-tech way of doing it, but paper, in-hand resource documents about the kinds of business incentives that are available. And they're posted on the California Workforce Investment Board website. We'll keep updating that as iterations of that work evolve. And hopefully, at some point, we'll develop the partnerships necessary to publish those or take it high-tech and actually have a web-based portal. So,
Questions? Yeah, please.
I just want to make a quick kudos to this scorecard and for publishing results online. I mean, for making. I think I'm talking loud enough, no? But. Oh, sorry. I wanted to just say that so many workforce development efforts do not track and publish their results. And I think this is a real issue for those of us who care about the results and want to have metrics to measure the results. And, you know, I know that, of course, we come out to the bottom line and here it's good, but when you piece it out, you know, it's not 100% success. And I think that's important for us all to recognize that we're not going to have 100% success all the time, and we don't have to hide all the time. We need to allow other communities who are working in these same issues to know what's been successful and what hasn't, and to step up and put it out there in a public forum so that we can track and measure people's, beyond the press release, what's really going on. So I really appreciate that.
Other questions? Yes. Or comments as well.
I guess one comment and then one question. One is, I've also been involved in the transportation, trade, and logistics sector. And the East Bay, as opposed to the LA or San Francisco, has multiple WIB jurisdictions and municipalities and all of that. And one thing we kind of found was even simple things like ITA being spread out among the various WIBs, there wasn't really any incentive or mechanism for them, for instance, to take a sector strategy and share those resources or have dedicated ITA dollars or other things available relative to that. Sorry, you're right. Available across those ends. The other is, are there specific economic development activities that local WIBs and public agencies can do? I mean, has the state WIB thought about if they are undertaking those kinds of things, whether it's the business credits you were talking about or bond development or whatever, that would then also then be, they would be rewarded under the WIA system, if you will, other than kind of specific funding opportunities that come forward.
Great.
So your comment is right on. The workforce investment system at the local level is a locally driven system. Each of those boards has the opportunity to set priorities for how it expends its dollars. What we are hopeful that we're doing by funding this regional partnership is beginning to draw those local boards more closely together so that they're aligning what they're doing. We know labor markets function at the regional level. It doesn't, labor market doesn't function along geopolitical boundaries. It functions along freeway systems and, where are jobs available for people who need to go to work. I originally came from San Bernardino County where I ran a local workforce investment board. And it was that experience that sort of informed thinking about how we were doing this regional piece that we wanted to do. So we're hoping that by bringing boards together for the purpose of planning and by bringing in additional partners, there'll start to be some resolution of those differences in how they fund ITAs and where they're setting priorities for investment. And you'll see more continuity. Your second question about what are we doing to incentivize or are there opportunities? One of the reasons we wanted to work at the regional level was because we know that it's a better way of understanding how we move California's economy. It's difficult to look at the large, California is enormous and so diverse in the way economies function within the state. By looking at the regional level, at least we're able to start to see where there are best practices and where we can learn from our regional and local partners, what are the kinds of activities, what are the kinds of funding mechanisms that are meaningful, and how do we support their regional plans in perhaps a different way than we have in the past. And I think many of those decisions will be left up to the next administration.
So obviously we can use WIA dollars for labor market analysis and things, but we're specifically prohibited for using it for economic development. But in this, one of the next, I know there's a little flexibility. We could talk about that, but it is, and there are ways in which you could not be interested in the creative ways that maybe other people have done that. In the city, our next step in our systems integration is that we are taking about $4 million of CDBG funds, and we're going to do a business source system. And we're going to make it available for the workforce centers to apply also for those business source incentives. And we're going to certainly connect it up to all of the public, job opportunities, especially on the contracting front in terms of capacity and the boot camps and the subcontract outreach programs, but many other pieces of it. But it'll be an interesting next step for our little systems integration strategy in LA. We'll see what happens.
That's great. Do you want to, Eleni, talk about the ways other people are doing it, sort of thing?
So I don't know that I can add much more. I think both through the skill panels and the work of connecting the local workforce boards with the local economic development councils, we are seeing examples of where business development and workforce development are coming together. So for instance, when an economic development council is working to help a company expand, help them get new equipment, open a product line, that they bring to the table with them folks from the workforce development community that then take their training dollars and reshape them so that they can meet the very specific skill needs that employer is looking for. So it's organic and it happens one employer at a time. We're hoping now to start building a best practices file of what's going on. And in fact, Washington established the Governor's Best Practice Award for Economic and Workforce Development Coordination. And, excuse me, we've been running it for 3 years now. The first year, I will tell you that I caved and let a number of applications get the award, even though I wouldn't say with integrity that they actually did merge economic and workforce development. In year 2, I'd say it was half and half. We awarded 6. 3 were absolutely there, and 3, not so much. They bear watching, though. And this year, I was pretty adamant, and folks from the governor's office were pretty adamant, and we let 2 actually win. One in Walla Walla, it's a water resource partnership fabulous. I mean, just all the partners involved, what they've created, new jobs being created, new occupational areas being created, and the community college has developed a new degree program in water resource management. Fabulous. And another one, totally opposite end of the spectrum, it's in environmental remediation, and I can't even remember. They're lower wage jobs, but with a career ladder, and they move formerly incarcerated adults and youth into these jobs that are being created by the employers specifically for these folks. It's an amazing partnership that's really working. So we're hoping now that as we get clear on what we mean and we do a lot more technical assistance out there, and we start promoting where these best practices have happened, we're going to see a proliferation throughout the state.
Right, well, oh, go ahead.
I had a follow-up question for Panama on AB 118. You had talked about the task force having the implementation plan, but that we need to ramp up the economic development implications. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that. And then Larry, I don't know if any of the sort of LA 3010 fits into that, but just wanted to ask you guys.
Yeah, the AB 118 program has just adopted its second investment plan strategy, and what it represents is a comprehensive look at the best ways to really ramp up the development of the clean fuel as well as the clean vehicle sectors here in California. We have had the participation of Barbara and other parts of the workforce community, and we have had some participation of the economic development community as well. But if you look at what we saw with the Recovery Act, with the level of engagement and activities and studies and research and economic analysis that went into the programs, I think that we can always look for even better ways as we're thinking about economic development strategies to be looking at our clean energy strategies as well and take our investment plans across the board to the next level to make sure that we're truly maximizing the economic benefits of our investments.
Larry?
So yeah, we're looking for partners around the country and around California that actually also have dollars that are coming in that could be accelerated if we were in fact had a development bank, an investment bank in this country. If we were a third world country, it would exist for us. We actually could take our income streams and get private capital and do massive construction in the middle of this recession. Right now, that concept doesn't exist. It's maybe the most hopeful opportunity in the next, next two Congresses to find a bipartisan strategy to come up with funding for stimulus dollars. So in that context, we're hoping to accelerate 30 years of public transit projects that are funded over 30 years into the next 10 years, telescope to the next 10 years, and thereby create about 155,000 annual jobs and literally thousands of tons of less particulate. So are those green jobs? It's all in the definition of who's defining it, but certainly it is a huge hope for Los Angeles, in terms of where it goes. And so the work that we're doing around the project labor agreement, local hire strategies, apprenticeship, the disadvantaged worker piece, all of it takes into account the hopes of this program.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a follow-up comment on Panama's information on the AB 118 investment plan. One of the things that we did talk about at the last advisory meeting was really looking at what the results were from the first round of investment, and a portion of that investment went to the regional cluster activities. That deep diagnostic, bringing together the regional partnerships, identifying where they had economic and workforce opportunity that fell into those priorities that are identified under AB 118. So I'm hopeful that we can work with the Energy Commission and bring those regional teams back to the Advisory Council to present their findings and their investment strategies, and then look at whether or not there's opportunity to leverage, again, against those regionally developed investment strategies around those priorities that meet the AB 118 priorities.
Carol?
Yeah, Larry, I wanted to ask you about that, this page on your thing, for two reasons. One is, why are some things like CRA, why is the numbers so tremendous? And secondly, how the heck did you get those numbers? Because it looks like you got placement numbers to track your trainees once they were in the workforce, and I haven't seen that before.
Which line are you looking at?
Well, like the CRA local hire is 495% above expected.
So it just came online. So that's the construction careers program we operate at CRA. So all construction is pretty much under a project labor agreement, and so it's a very data-rich environment with certified payroll. So it's actually pretty easy to track
Okay.
numbers.
So you're not, that's where you're getting it. You're not going into the EDD data.
No, it's a certified payrolls. Yeah, it's actually the most data-rich environment we have in the city.
And then are those trainees through pre-apprenticeship, or are those the number of local hires, or what
Those
are they?
those are the local hires, but it includes the apprentices, exactly. So on the top, you'll see another number for apprentices. So sometimes it's hard to count exactly, right? So each one has a long, I could give you the 20-page definition sheet if you want to see it as to exactly what it means. But on the overall apprenticeship program,
Where are you?
if you go up to the top on the sector-based strategy on line number 15, my
Right.
glasses. So that actually is a piece of work that we've been doing with the trades. You know, under Prop 209, we're not allowed to literally set any kind of quotas for race-based participation. But the construction industry has gone from an Anglo kinship system to a Latino kinship system, at least in Los Angeles. And African Americans never really did enter at the residential, the low-wage commercial side. That became a largely immigrant population. And so African Americans literally have never had that or taken the opportunity to get into the construction industry, but it is public money. So for a Latino mayor, it's an extremely significant challenge to explain how public money is being used and how a major part of the tax-paying population is not participating. So we've been very focused on the trades fixing a huge structural problem. We've done that by bringing more work through the union hall. So union, non-union companies get to bid on construction dollars. All but core workers are sent out from the union hall. Union has many more workers to be able to count on being able to work. And they've been working, we've invested a lot of money into our pipeline through our work source centers and PV jobs to do referrals. And so we've actually have now over 1,700 new African-American apprentices in the city of Los Angeles over the last 3 years. Yeah, so that's what that number is, but I don't clarify it here, yeah.
I actually want to, I have a question that comes right on the heels of that, actually, that I've been wanting to ask you guys, and then I promise I'll get back to the audience. You know, one of the things we heard in this morning's plenary was that most of the jobs, most green jobs are sort of in existing job categories, and many of the, and there was an urging that we focus on incumbent workers. And I'm interested in you all's reflections on the implications of that for moving toward greater diversity within this workforce, and what it means. I mean, it sounds like you've been addressing that head on in the construction trades and in the apprenticeship systems, but clearly this is a challenge if we're going to be sort of, somebody asked in an earlier panel about women as well as about race and ethnic diversity. But have you guys, I mean, is that coming up in your thinking about how to implement all of this?
I'd say yes. So what we know from a workforce perspective, and it took us a while to learn this or acknowledge that it was a fact, was when we engage in incumbent worker training, what it provides us from a workforce system perspective is a better understanding of the skill sets that are going to be needed by the entry-level workforce. So ultimately what you create is a healthier cycle. You're assisting incumbent workers with gaining the skills that they need to do jobs currently and potentially to advance, creating that vacuum needed at the entry level to pull new workforce entrants in. And we're the beneficiaries at the workforce board level, at the one-stop level, at the community college or training institution level, of the good knowledge that we gain. When we know what it takes to move an incumbent worker up, we have a better idea of what it takes to move a new workforce entrant in. So then you partner that with the work that currently occurs in most career centers and one-stop systems to expose individuals who are not represented in particular occupations to the occupational opportunities, to recruit racial and ethnic groups into occupations where they don't have a high degree of concentration. So it gives you the opportunity to work that pipeline the way that you need to in order to make sure that you're getting the diversity you need in the new entrants into that workforce.
So the trades in Los Angeles are about 4% African American in a city that's about 10% African American. It's about 1.5% women in a city which is more than 1.5% women. But the construction industry is a difficult nut to crack in terms of gender. There are great organizations, Women in the Trades, Winter, others that take a real shot at it, and we do some partnership with them. We found the energy efficiency opportunity is a much better chance to make headway on that, and so that's why we've been very focused on the pre-civil service classifications, and we actually are doing really well on the small sampling of workers that we've been able to bring in so far, and we're being successful. So that would be my short answer. Yeah.
Just that there's been a real policy shift that moves in the opposite direction. In Washington, as far as the building trades, we have had historical investments in trying to encourage young women to consider the building trades and other non-traditional occupations. And there have been a number of different programs, pre-apprenticeship programs, mentoring, connecting activities, kinds of efforts. When the recession really hit, when it was clear that we weren't coming out and construction was going to continue to be hit, the policy kind of shifted towards re-employing the already trained workforce as rapidly as possible. And by making that policy decision, we automatically move away from particularly women, but often minority males as well. So there are still efforts, again, with young women, young minority males doing some pre-apprenticeship training, but my guess is that that's going to disappear with the next budget discussion as well, because it is one of those few areas of discretionary spending. So I don't have any good answers to that.
I would say, and others can correct me if I'm wrong, but our experience is that incumbent worker, you cannot use dislocated worker dollars for incumbent workers, obviously, and there's actually been a decision to that effect. And the theory is that in LA we have 285,000 people that are unemployed, right? That we should be doing training with unemployed workers as opposed to incumbent workers. The theory for those people interested in doing the incumbent worker training is that you're actually doing a skills upgrade that'll allow people to advance and leave an opening behind them. It gets rather complicated. So our adult dollars are in very, very high demand in Los Angeles. Our dislocated worker dollars, we're having actually it's much more difficult because you don't necessarily want to train people for jobs that do not exist, and you create you're selling wolf tickets out in the community, and it's a tough thing to do to a certain extent. On the other hand, we're all in the business of saying we're preparing people for the moment when the economy comes back. We used to talk about the high growth sectors. Now we call the growth potential sectors, as we sort of develop our sector strategies. But it's on the ground, it's a difficult piece of work. Yeah.
So I want to address the incumbent worker question. And I said at one point in my remarks that the workforce investment system is a locally operated system. So local workforce investment boards do have discretion over what they choose to focus their money on. We do have a waiver at the state level that does allow workforce investment boards to utilize up to 10% of their formula funding to do workforce training with incumbent workers. LA has made a decision that that's not where their priority is. There are other boards that do have that as a priority, and because their labor markets are different, may be focusing on that. We also have received a waiver from the Department of Labor on our rapid response funding, allowing a portion of the money that we use for responding to layoffs or to avert layoffs to provide worker training so that those workers that are at risk in an environment and who just need some additional training to help that company become more competitive, we can do that kind of training. It's time limited. It's only during the ARA period, so June 30th it will expire. But I wanted to make it clear, 10%, but it is a local decision on whether or not a board allows their one-stop centers to focus on that population.
So we have, yep, perfect. We have time probably for one, maybe two questions, so go for it.
Hi, good afternoon. Paula Risa, Carpenters, Northern California. I was going to talk about the recruiting women. What we've done is we've offered direct entry to some of our CBOs that we partner with, and we put the onus on them as far as bringing in 20% women. So 1 in every 5 that they send us for direct entry must be a woman, so that kind of helps quite a bit. You know, if the work was better, it would help even more. And then I was just going to make one more comment about projects and green, and we're all talking about building, but I heard the other day that the most green thing you can do is deconstruction, reuse, and recycle. We've had some really good success in past programs with pre-apprenticeship with deconstructing old mills up in Northwark, California that nobody wanted, nobody could afford to pull it down, an old tuberculosis center in Awani. These are great programs for pre-apprenticeship because sometimes you learn more pulling something down than you do actually building it. So I just wanted to put that out there as thoughts and ideas. They're great training programs, plus the counties benefit at the same time. Thank you.
That's great. So, great, yeah, why don't we take one more, and then I'm looking for my minders here, but I was told I had to stop we have to stop at 4:15, yes, so go.
Just real quickly, you had both, Barbara and Larry, mentioned about the difficulty in reaching the small business community. I work for the California Public Utilities Commission. We have the same exact problem. We have a few associations that are focused on them, but on the next business meeting, December 16th, Commissioner Bond has put on the agenda the development of a small business council. Now, I know that the commission sits on the Green Collar Jobs Council, so if indeed this small business council gets approved by the commission, then hopefully any discussion that happens in there can be brought back to the Green Collar Jobs Council, so to create that linkage and continue this coordination effort.
Great, and I think on that note we shall end. You guys were a fabulous crowd. I'm sure it's late in the day. It's been a long day, so I was delighted. You were as perky and thoughtful as you were, and I want to thank our panel for doing it again. So everybody should just stay here, or?
Yeah, we have a 15-minute break, but do stay here. The next panel, I know it's a long day, but the reception's after it. Plus,
you'll get rewarded.
We kind of get to put the policymakers on the hot seat, and the moderators will sort of express their takeaways and next steps and get reaction. So stick around. That'll start at 4:30.